This video has been floating around a lot, surprisingly. I guess I counted on a little late. But this is Andrew Tate and Piers Morgan. This is a preview to like the full show. Obviously, we can't watch the full show on here, but we can watch the preview. And a lot of people are reacting to this too. So, yeah, let's take a look. I'm interested. I'm curious about it. You know, Top G obviously is taking a little bit of a hit because he's banned and he's, you know, kind of, I feel like he's less relevant now. He's kind of, you know, but let's get this going.
It's the most famous man you've probably never heard of, but the chances are your children will have. Videos of Tate have been viewed billions of times online. He's built an enormous following of mostly young men, and his often scandalous views about women that have made him notorious across the world.
Scandalous. Wow.
Views like this.
So I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle to marry the groom, the father walks next to her and gives her away. True or false?
Tate's opinion.
Yeah, it's true. I guess that's what people are criticizing, right? Like that shouldn't be the way it is. Traditionally, it was like giving them away. Now it's more of a tradition. You know, it's nice for them to give them away, but it doesn't mean that they're transferring ownership. That's what the implication is there. It's like, doesn't the father own the daughter until the father sells the daughter to the husband? It's an interesting way to look at things. Yeah, I guess so, traditionally, but I don't think that we need to uphold that.
Opinions on mental illness are equally controversial.
I don't believe in depression. Don't message me about depression because I don't believe in it. If you're asleep in your bed in the middle of the night and you hear a noise and you believe in ghosts, now you're afraid. But if you don't believe in ghosts, it's the wind and you go back to sleep. You give the ghosts power by believing in them.
Interesting. I mean, I'm sure for some people they could just pick themselves up by their bootstraps and no longer have mental health problems, I guess. Most people, it's a lot deeper than that, but okay.
Well, this summer, every major social media platform banned Tate amid a global backlash and concerns about his influence on the young people who watch him. But copies of his videos are still shared millions of times every day. This show is called Uncensored. One of the challenges views directly. So
is that the one on Rumble?
He flew from Romania to sit here in this studio, and the full explosive interview airs later this week. Here's a bit of what's to come.
So I guess since he was able to fly from Romania, I'm assuming they do this in like Europe in some kind of way or shape or form. I guess that means that he can still enter Europe. Weren't people saying that like Andrew Tate couldn't come back to like the UK in some capacity or something like that? There was a little bit of a conspiracy theory about that.
Do you respect women?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't I?
Do you think that 18, 19-year-old women are more attractive than 25-year-old women?
I think there's attractive people. That's a loaded question. I don't know.
Well, it's not really, is it?
I can't.
You know why I'm asking you?
Of course I do, but I can't sit here and say.
Hold on. It's interesting because I saw this cut up in like a weird way.
Do you respect women?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't I?
Do you think that 18, 19-year-old women are more attractive than 25-year-old women?
I think there's attractive people. That's a loaded question. I don't know.
Well, it's not really, is it?
Could be a little bit of a loaded question, depending on how you're asking that. Like, if you're specifically asking to catch him into a trap, then, like, yeah, that could be a loaded question. If you're going to give him the time to, like, elaborate, and he might have a good answer. I feel like he probably doesn't, but he might have a good answer. You know, you kind of need to give him that time. Yeah, I feel like Andrew Tate's, like, afraid to answer everything now because he's been kind of shit on, which is deservedly so, I think, because he's had some incredible... Well, he's a little bit sexist. I think he means well, but, like, he has very regressive views on women that aren't good for people to be hearing. So...
I can't.
You know why I'm asking you?
Of course I do, but I can't sit here and
say... For the
say...
benefit of viewers who don't know why I'm asking, you said this. In general, this is also one of the reasons men find youth attractive. You want to blow up the internet? I'll blow up the internet right effing now. The reason 18 and 19-year-olds are more attractive than 25-year-olds is because they've been through less dick. People say, oh, you can't say that, but yes, I can. A 19-year-old is more attractive than a 26-year-old woman, and I'll tell you why. Because that 26-year-old has talked to more guys, been to the club more times, been effed and dumped more times, more...
Oh, Andrew Tate's afraid to answer these. Wow,
arguments, more mess, more for me to clean up. That is times more arguments, more mess, more for me to clean up. That is misogyny.
It's...
Why?
So I can explain to you why that's like a misogynistic take. So there's a lot here. First and foremost, okay, it's so weird. It's like so bizarre. Okay, first and foremost, not every girl goes to like the club and stuff. Andrew Tate seems to specifically interact with like younger girls, legal age girls. Okay, we're not, you know, but younger girls that like stay in the clubs, like those like Miami, Florida girls who are there to party and kind of get fucked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the biggest things. So that's like the first issue that we encounter. And then the second issue we encounter is like obviously the idea that like the more bodies you have, the you know, the worse or the lower value you are, which is a fine take to have if you share that equally with both men and women. You know what I mean? I think that anybody with a higher body count is kind of gross in general, you know? And statistically speaking, there's like a thing going around that's talking about how like women with lower body counts tend to be report being happier in marriages. Same thing with men though. So, you know, so like, you know, it's one of those things where there's an unequal standard there. So yeah, I guess that would be like misogynist in that capacity. Yeah, that's why it would be. But there's a lot more than just that one thing. It's not like it's just that one statement that he's made. There's multiple statements across the board where like Andrew Tate has like a regressive view on women. When it comes to like women doing OnlyFans, he wants to take like 80% of it. But that's a bit obviously sexist because he wouldn't do that in reverse. When it comes to vacations, he can go out with his friends on vacations. These are things that he said, but he wouldn't let his girl go on a vacation with another woman because he wouldn't be able to trust them sleeping around. That's obviously another like, problematic thing for him to say. We saw the transfer of ownership idea. He wants to uphold like these kind of dated ideologies. There was one interview where he compared women to like children and dogs, not in like this like, oh, you're disgusting way, but it was in this way where it's like, oh, you know, a man should take care of a woman. And then it was like similar to like, you know, how you need to have authority over a dog. And it's like, okay, you know, obviously comparing women to children and dogs, either animals which are not human or children who are literally don't have the ability or capacity to consent to anything. Like you're treating women as less than. So these are a lot of, there's just a pattern of him just being very sexist, and it all comes out here. Yeah, see, like here, that OnlyFans one was a joke, but it wasn't. And one of the problems is that you guys are like desperate to call everything a joke, but you're not correct. It wasn't really a joke. I've seen the clip like probably 4 or 5 times, and I've talked about it multiple times. We're at a point where you guys are like, you're inhaling copium, and you guys can't just say that something's a joke because you don't want to believe that there's some kind of a misogynistic undertone to it. The reality is I don't think that Andrew Tate's a bad guy. Realistically, okay, you're saying he said 50-50. He said 80%, but even 50-50 is wrong. You shouldn't be taking money from your partner in that way. You're basically prostituting your partner at that point. And he said that, and when he was pushed on it by Dave Portnoy, he said, oh, I wouldn't do it in reverse, though. I wouldn't do it if I did OnlyFans. So it doesn't matter if he corrected himself later. You have to understand that you're very wrong about this. Again, it's a double standard on the woman-man dynamic in a relationship. So I just want you to be aware that you're incorrect. Anyway, back to what I was saying. There's a pattern of obvious like misogynistic type behavior, but I don't think that he like hates women. I think he likes women. I think that he was looking for a particular relationship dynamic, which I think is perfectly fine. But he tries to push that onto everybody. He upholds again like the manosphere ideology that's like that it's like he wouldn't cheat, he says, but it's okay if a man cheats in a relationship, but not a woman because women are pretty much exclusively valued for their bodies. Generally speaking, the manosphere is very toxic. Women are obviously more than just their bodies. I don't think Andrew Tate hates women, but like that's the problem, isn't it? Because I think that if we kind of look at Andrew Tate as a genuine guy, which you could say a lot about him, but he is a genuine guy, you realize that he means what he's saying and he's not grifting, and he actually believes he's not being sexist with these double standards. And that is like the core problem, is I don't think anybody's ever approached him in a way where it's like, hey, listen, like, do you understand what you're saying is wrong, or do you think that it's actually right? And that's kind of where we get to go here with Andrew Tate in a lot of different areas, a lot of different things.
Because you are encouraging a mindset about 25-year-old women that makes them sound out to be infinitely less desirable than 18, 19-year-olds, and having effectively been having too much sex to be taken in a more respectful way.
Well, firstly, even if that was the case, that wouldn't be misogyny.
But what did you mean by what you said?
That's not misogyny because it's not anti-women. I'm saying that an 18 or a 19-year-old woman would be more desirable.
Pretty anti-20.
So it's not like this is the problem. It's like it's not. It doesn't. Something doesn't have to be hateful or towards another person for it to be like misogynist, or women to be misogynistic. You don't have to hate women to be a misogynist. It's more about upholding like unequal standards between both men and women that would make it like a misogyny, right? So like again, the foundation of valuing women for their youth and how many bodies they've come through. I mean, the bodies thing I don't give a shit about, but just the idea that like all 25-year-old women fundamentally have been through like so much more dick to a point where they're like undesirable, I think is upholding like a very misogynistic stereotype, especially since, again, he wouldn't put the same value on a man. If he's like, I think it's disgusting for anybody to fuck like 20 people, you know, and like I'm disgusting. I was just gonna say that would be fine. But again, it's a double standard specifically on women, right? It's like valuing men more for more sex and women for having less sex, even though statistically, the higher amount of sex you have before you're married, or higher amount of bodies you have before you're married, actually causes people to report on a less happy marriage, right? Just letting you know.
25-year-old women.
Anti-25-year-old women, we can argue, but not misogyny.
Well, that's misogyny then, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Well, being anti any woman at all is misogyny.
Not when I'm...
Pierce is not doing a great job of communicating his message, I'll tell you right now.
Not when I'm saying that women are beautiful and attractive at a certain age and saying the age
You're
is
saying
different.
18, 19-year-olds are more attractive than 25.
Well, then ageist, perhaps, but misogynistic, absolutely
Is that
not.
really? But you just accepted it was misogyny.
No, I didn't. You said it was misogyny. I'm telling you, no, it's not.
But if a 26-year-old woman is watching this and has heard those comments,
Yeah.
would you just say to her, look, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that?
No, I won't. I will say that I am sorry that offends you. However, there's a large contingent of the world.
That doesn't mean you're sorry.
No, I'm not sorry. That's the point I'm making. I'm sorry if that offends you. However, there's a large contingent of the world that believe that, and I was mediating for a conversation.
Parts of the world that believe that about 26-year-old women are parts of the world where women are not allowed out on their own.
That's a conversation.
They have to wear full burqas.
That is true. Those are more or less progressive countries, sure.
Well, that's a conversation.
They're not allowed to drive cars.
That's nothing to do with me.
But is that the kind of world for women that you?
I was mediating a conversation.
No, I'm asking you what you.
This is a terrible conversation. This is terrible, bro. This is horrible. I can see now why people are coming out of this being like, "Oh, Andrew Tate won this conversation." Yeah, they do need to stop interrupting him. He needs to be able to like talk. He needs to be able to talk. Like we don't have anything. He just keeps getting interrupted, and like Piers is just asserting something onto Tate. Like, let him talk himself into a corner if he's so dumb. You know what I mean? But like, if you keep going on and on, it's kind of fucks it up.
You think?
I don't live in a country where that happens.
You're using that as the excuse
I think isn't
for why you're not sorry for saying it.
It's not an
Is that there are
excuse.
parts of the world where this is fine?
My
So
friend.
my question to you is, well, do you think it's fine?
I don't think it's fine. I live in a world where
You don't think it's fine?
God, this is horrible. I'm feeling bad for Andrew Tate. This is like I want to hear the guy talk.
reason
This
I
isn't that hard, Andrew. You can simply say, Piers, you know what? With the benefit of hindsight, I wish I hadn't said it like that. And if a 26-year-old woman's watching, I'm sorry I said that, because that actually is blatantly misogynist. And even though that's a view held by other parts of the world, it's not a view I share. Now, I would respect you more if you said that than if you try
Well, he doesn't really have an opportunity to say anything. So what the fuck are you talking about?
and say, well, it's said in other parts of the world, so I'm not sorry.
I think
That doesn't tell me what you think.
Then you need to understand why my content existed in the first place. My content existed because I tried my very hardest to be an absolute and utter realist, especially with uncomfortable truths.
Okay.
I was pointing out that
I think it's true that he feels that way about himself, but that doesn't mean that every uncomfortable truth that he expresses is an actual truth. It's just a way that he feels. And that's where you'd engage the conversation to try to change like the way he feels about a particular topic, right?
very uncomfortable.
Is that a truth? Then?
It's an uncomfortable truth in many parts of the world. It's not a truth that I'm happy about.
So if you say uncomfortable truth in many parts of the world, that means that that's more of a social, like something that's been upheld from like a social perspective and doesn't need to be that way. I'm just,
An inquest this week found that a 14-year-old girl, Molly Russell, died from an act of self-harm while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. The coroner said she was exposed to material that may have influenced her in a negative way, and in addition, what started as depression had become a much more serious depressive illness, and she very sadly took her life.
that's horrible.
That's absolutely disgusting.
Right. Her father,
it's terrible.
Her father's campaign for better protections against potentially dangerous social media algorithms, right? It says that the particularly graphic
How edited is this?
content she saw romanticized acts of self-harm, normalized her condition, and focused on a limited and irrational view without any counterbalance of normality. Focused on a limited and irrational or romanticized acts of self-harm algorithms, right? It says that the particularly graphic content she saw romanticized acts of self-harm.
So, okay. So what sounds like is happening right now is Piers is trying to say that Andrew Tate is responsible for her taking her own life because his content is toxic. And I think it's toxic, yeah. But then goes on to talk about how some of the content that influenced this young girl was romanticized like ideology about self-harm. That's TikTok, and there are spheres in TikTok that do that. So I feel like she may not be the one that, like, I don't think it kind of seems like Piers is like disgustingly trying to blame Andrew Tate for this happening here. It's like a shame tactic instead of engaging with what the guy's talking about. This just seems like a real dickheaded thing.
Normalized her condition and focused on a limited and irrational view without any counterbalance of normality. first of all, what is your response to that?
Well, what do you think he's going to say? Oh, I think it's funny that a young girl killed herself. Of course not. Like what?
Nothing to do with you.
That's the first thing. Yeah, it is nothing to do with me. The fact that a 14-year-old girl took her life is truly sad. The world we live in today is the world we live in. The fact that something like that happened is almost mind-blowing to me. That's truly sad. I actually feel sad inside to see something like that.
What has come clear to me in the interview is that a lot of things you say you wouldn't say now that you've said before.
But I'd say them differently, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. Right. So to me, that's an acceptance, not just that you want to get back on platforms, because maybe that was one of the reasons you were no platform, but that you've recognized and understood the potential harm to the wrong kind of impressionable mind by some of the things you've said. Would that be fair?
I think that's 80% fair.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think everybody's been there. The one thing that you can give Andrew Tate like a little bit of a benefit of or a break for is that, okay, so I'll give a little bit of an anecdote. I was talking to my wife the other day. I know, my wife. And I was like, I find it so weird that people used to think I was like conservative because I've always consistently had the same views for like, I don't know, since I got into like politics, like maybe 7 or 8 maybe years ago. I've been pretty consistent and like, I've been pretty progressive. And my wife's like, yeah, you have been. I'm more educated on these topics now, though. But she's like, but now you express them differently. Back then, you would express them in like an edgier way, and you cared like it was just a different way that you would express different topics or speak your mind on particular topics. And that's probably why I had like an audience of some people who prioritize edginess over the message, right? So to give him a little bit of a break on that, like, yeah, it's possible that like some of the things he was saying weren't meant to be so negative, but they come off as such because of the way that he expressed himself. And like when you're very new to the internet and like there's like and in the real world, you basically have very like smaller spheres, right? Like you have you usually people that are local to you have a very similar like way of talking and speaking and interpreting language, and because everybody talks a little bit differently. And then when you go into different areas, people kind of take different things in a different way. And so like around me, I'm a lot of people in my life and my family and in the area I live in where I've always worked, very blunt people. It's very blunt people who will speak, obviously very bluntly. And so you can say something that's kind of a dickhead thing to say, and it won't be taken as a dickheaded thing to say because everybody understands that. Like, like if someone's like, hey, you're getting a little bit fat, around me, that's not that big of a deal because you're like, yeah, I understand you're not trying to be an asshole, but it kind of comes like that. But then you go somewhere else like California and you say like, oh, you're being a little fat, and they just start crying. They're like, oh my God, and they start cutting, and that's the internet for you. There's like 100 different bubbles converging. So that's possible that some of his stuff is taken out of context. Maybe he wishes he wasn't so antagonistic. But of course, people, mostly his fans, cutting up the more antagonistic stuff is what made him blow up in the first place because they thought it was funny, which is obviously like an issue.
I recognize and understand that with massive fame, you have to be more careful about being misconstrued. Like I said earlier, 1% of people misunderstanding you doesn't matter with a small audience. It matters with a very large audience.
Well, I don't think it's just 1%. I think a lot of people understand it. Like, and to be generous to you, and I don't even know if I agree with this, the misunderstanding you, it's more than just 1% of people. It's a lot of people.
With power comes...
I know I'm giving him charity. I'm just saying, like, hey, listen, I'm just being contextually accurate. I don't think that it is like a matter of massive interpretation or misinterpretation. I think a lot of like what he does believe deep down is shit. When he talked to Hassan, and I'm not a big Hassan fan, but when he talked to Hassan and he was like, yeah, men are better drivers. And Hassan's like, well, statistically speaking, women tend to be a bit better. I mean, they're less expensive when it comes to insurance, which is a decent way to gauge it because obviously these companies want to prioritize money. So they're going to make insurance more expensive for people who generally are more expensive. And of course, it's more complicated than that, like men are better race car drivers, like professionally, but most of us aren't professional drivers. And then Tate will go into his speech about how like, yeah, well, if it's like, he said this in the interview, which I thought was very funny and very telling about the way that like Andrew Tate's like sphere kind of collapses in on him. He's like, yeah, well, if I'm hanging out and I got to drive in the snow, I'm not going to let the 18-year-old girl drive. I'm going to drive. And it shows that like he tends to engage with legal age, but younger girls and younger people in general are just kind of dumb and usually not as seasoned at anything than an older person, right? So you kind of start to get this like worldview ideology. So he is sexist underneath all the jokes. He's more antagonistic in his jokes. I don't think that he's a disrespectful person fundamentally. but like the way that the ideas he have are obviously less respectful of women, which I know sounds like a weird thing to say, but yeah, I don't think that he tries to be intentionally disrespectful. I think he believes these things genuinely.
Comes responsibility. I still believe the things I say. I do not want to be a negative force for the world. I also understand that I am a man who's lived a very difficult, nuanced life, and I am capable of making nuanced points that may be misunderstood by teenagers.
Maybe. I don't know. I've never seen him make a nuanced point.
However, that can be said about anybody and everything. Every opinion online can be misunderstood by children. Trying to protect children from the internet is a very interesting subject.
The problem is that he hasn't really been able to explain these misconstrued ideologies to adults either. That's the problem. I don't think all of it is just misinterpreted.
In and of itself, because I would argue that 80% of the content on the internet can be negative or detrimental to a young mind that doesn't understand the world.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Maybe I'll have to watch the full thing. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching, and a special shout out to all my Patreon patrons, my YouTube members, and my Twitch subs. If you'd like to learn how you can contribute even more than you already are by simply watching the video, you can check the links down below, which will unlock a special feature depending on the platform that you subscribe to, such as Patreon here that will get your name right here on this wall. Thank you so much guys again for watching, and have a good one.